Trump calls for lower interest rates as Fed officials watch inflation. The immediate conflict is political pressure against a central bank still trying to decide whether price gains are contained enough to cut borrowing costs. Reuters points to a Boston Fed paper saying stronger productivity softened the inflation impact from tariffs, which gives rate cut advocates one piece of evidence. USA Today and CNBC describe Trump arguing that the United States should be paying much less, turning that evidence into a public demand on policymakers. PBS and the New York Times add the counterweight. Many Fed officials have said higher rates may be needed if inflation remains elevated, and some have lost patience with persistent price pressure. That means the policy question is not only whether one paper looks encouraging, but whether broader CPI categories, wages, energy, and consumer demand all move in the same direction. Borrowers would feel relief from lower rates, while savers, bond investors, and households facing sticky prices could bear different risks. Financial markets also need a credible path, because premature easing can weaken inflation expectations, while delayed cuts can keep credit tight for small businesses, municipalities, and households refinancing debt. The next evidence point is the inflation detail inside agency data and the language Fed officials use before the next policy meeting. What is Scott Bessent doing with the 32TN Treasury market, and will it work? The question matters because Treasury market plumbing affects mortgages, corporate borrowing, bank liquidity, and the price of nearly every dollar-denominated asset. Reuters says Treasury Secretary Bessent has argued that upsized bond buybacks could increase further, a tool meant to improve liquidity in older securities without changing the whole debt strategy. The Financial Times, CNBC, The Washington Post, and AP all frame the issue around whether those interventions have calmed a bond market still swinging with rate expectations and deficit concerns. Buybacks can help specific off-the-run bonds trade more smoothly, but they do not erase investor worries about issuance size, inflation, or future Federal Reserve policy. If the market doubts Treasury's plan, yields can stay volatile even while the department changes auction sizes or repurchase operations. Primary dealers also watch whether inventory risk becomes easier to finance, because strained dealer balance sheets can transmit stress into auctions during heavy issuance weeks and quarter-end funding strains today. The stakes reach beyond traders, because a disorderly Treasury market raises costs for households, businesses, and the government itself. The useful next signal is not a slogan about confidence, but auction demand, bid-to-cover ratios, dealer balance sheet pressure, and whether volatility falls after each announced operation. Heidi Overton is Trump's choice to lead the FDA. Reuters reports that the administration selected a White House ally for an agency already under strain, and NPR says the nominee currently works as a White House policy aide. PBS and Cascade PBS emphasize the institutional scale. If confirmed, she would lead an FDA workforce of about 18,000 people responsible for drugs, vaccines, medical devices, tobacco, and much of the food supply. The confirmation fight is therefore not only biographical. It is about whether senators trust her scientific judgment, management experience, and independence from political pressure. The agency's choices can affect approval timelines, inspection priorities, recall communications, and how companies present evidence for safety and effectiveness. Supporters may argue that a White House role gives her direct access to administration priorities, while critics can press whether that closeness weakens public confidence in technical decisions. The FDA also faces lawsuits, staffing stress, and scrutiny from patients, industry, and public health groups. A commissioner can shape advisory panels, enforcement priorities, and public messaging even when career scientists perform the underlying reviews on contested products, recalls, inspections, and labeling disputes nationwide. The next concrete record is her nomination file, Senate hearing testimony, ethics disclosures, and any written commitments about evidence standards, agency independence, staffing levels, and inspection priorities. Chinese court sentences founder of property developer Evergrande to life in prison. Reuters, NPR, The New York Times, and The Guardian report that the founder of China Evergrande received the sentence after fraud proceedings tied to the collapse of a property empire. Evergrande's failure mattered because the company was once a symbol of debt-fueled real estate growth, and its crisis rippled through home buyers, suppliers, local governments, and offshore creditors. A life sentence turns the case from a corporate restructuring story into a political and legal signal about accountability for financial excess. It may reassure some households that authorities are punishing misconduct, but it does not by itself finish unfinished apartments, repay bondholders, or restore confidence in developers. The record also matters for foreign investors watching whether Chinese courts distinguish criminal liability, company debt, and civil recovery. If prosecutions expand, other executives and lenders could face new pressure. If asset recovery remains limited, victims may see punishment without compensation. Local governments remain exposed because land sales, construction employment, and mortgage confidence all interact with the broader property slowdown across Chinese cities and provincial financing vehicles that rely on land revenue. The next practical signs are court documents, administrator updates, creditor recovery terms, and whether Beijing pairs criminal accountability with measures that stabilize property demand and local government finances. Frozen blueberries recall categorized under FDA's highest Class I risk level. The Hill, USA Today, CBS News, and local outlets report that the recall upgrade concerns frozen blueberries and mixed berries sold through Publix, not every berry product in every freezer. A Class I categorization means regulators believe use of the affected product could cause serious adverse health consequences or death, so households need lot-level identification rather than general brand anxiety. CBS says the FDA upgraded the recall to its highest health risk level, and USA Today points viewers toward where the products were sold. The actionable distinction is product name, package size, lot code, store, and purchase window. Without those identifiers, shoppers can either miss a risky item or throw away unaffected food. Retailers need matching shelf removal notices, while consumers need refund or disposal instructions that align with the company and FDA records. The public health stakes are practical. Vulnerable people may face higher risk, and frozen products can remain in home freezers long after a headline fades. Recall classifications can also change after initial notices, so dated updates matter for families that already checked once or bought multiple packages from different store visits. The next evidence to check is the FDA recall page, Publix notices, affected state lists, and any update narrowing or expanding the lot codes. CFTC's Innovation Advisory Committee meeting addresses emerging prediction market risks. CNBC says regulators and advisors examine market integrity and consumer risk concerns, while the Crypto Times identifies the session as a live agency advisory meeting. Defy Rate says the discussion included market limits and consumer safeguards, and The Hill notes that prediction market companies were shut out of a separate Trump meeting with tech executives. The policy issue is that event contracts can look like financial hedges, political wagers, information markets, or gambling products depending on design and use. The CFTC has to decide how to handle manipulation, insider information, thin liquidity, event settlement, and consumer understanding before markets grow too large to supervise cleanly. Industry advocates want room for innovation, but regulators can ask who verifies outcomes, who protects retail users, and what happens when contracts touch elections, war, public health, or criminal proceedings. The stakes extend to exchanges, crypto-linked platforms, campaign observers, and ordinary users who may not understand the difference between probability signals and enforceable facts. Platform design also matters because small contract limits, disclosure language, and settlement appeals can change both risk and usefulness before losses spread across retail accounts. The next concrete signs are proposed rules, advisory committee minutes, enforcement actions, and whether registered exchanges receive clearer limits for listing new contracts. Who is Hind Rajab and why is Israel investigating her killing? Reuters reports that Israel has admitted its troops killed 5-year-old Hind Rajab in Gaza and opened a criminal probe, while Al Jazeera, the New York Times, CBS, and CNN describe the broader case involving people in the car and rescue workers. The core issue is accountability for a child's death during military operations, not simply identification of a victim. A criminal investigation must reconstruct who fired, what troops knew, whether the vehicle was assessed as a threat, how rescue coordination unfolded, and why emergency responders also died. The admission is significant because it moves the case from outside allegation to an internal military record, but it is not the same thing as a completed prosecution or public explanation. Families, rights groups, and governments will watch whether investigators release evidence, discipline commanders, or refer soldiers for trial. The case also affects international scrutiny of civilian protection in Gaza and the credibility of Israel's own investigative system. A credible process would need to address both the strike on the vehicle and the later response to rescue calls during the emergency. The next records are military police findings, witness accounts, communications logs, autopsy, or forensic material if released, and whether any charging decision follows the probe. The UAE announces a halt to trade with Iran amid Trump's push to isolate Tehran. The New York Times reports the Emirati trade halt as part of a wider U.S. effort to pressure Iran, while CBS, the Financial Times, CNBC, and The Hill describe Trump announcing a crushing economic operation and warning of consequences for Tehran's backers. The practical distinction is between a public political declaration and the detailed enforcement rules that companies, banks, insurers, and ports must follow. If Abu Dhabi curtails commerce, firms need to know whether the restriction covers direct goods, re-exports, financial services, shipping, energy, or dual-use products. Iran's response matters because pressure campaigns can trigger retaliation through diplomacy, proxies, shipping risk, or nuclear escalation rather than immediate negotiation. Regional businesses will watch compliance exposure, dollar clearing risk, and whether other Gulf states match the move or preserve channels. For Washington, the stakes are whether economic isolation changes behavior without widening conflict or disrupting energy flows. Shipping and insurance markets may react before diplomats do, especially if enforcement affects Gulf ports or dollar payments. The next evidence is official Emirati guidance, U.S. sanctions designations, port and banking notices, Tehran's public response, and any exception process for humanitarian or legacy contracts already underway through banks or regional shippers now. North Korea fires a suspected missile toward the sea, Japan says. NPR reports the launch alert from Japan, while PBS says North Korea fired missiles after dismissing an overture from Trump, and The Guardian and NBC cite about 10 short-range ballistic missiles reported by Seoul. The first question is classification. Suspected missile, confirmed ballistic missile, number of launches, trajectory, range, and whether anything landed near shipping or air routes. Those details determine whether the event is a routine show of force, a test of a particular system, or a signal timed to diplomacy and military exercises. The launch also follows a U.S. decision to scale back some joint drills with South Korea, which Pyongyang may read differently from Washington or Seoul. Japan, South Korea, and the United States will compare radar tracks, issue safety notices, and decide whether to answer with statements, sanctions coordination, or military activity. The risk for civilians is indirect but real because misread launches can raise alert levels and disrupt regional travel or maritime operations. Missile tests also help analysts infer readiness, launcher mobility, and command signaling even when no warhead is used or claimed by state media. The next concrete records are Defense Ministry assessments, Japanese Coast Guard warnings, South Korean military briefings, and whether North Korea's state media confirms the system tested.